Welcome to Advanced Web Development in Python with Django. My name is Andrew Pinkham, and in this first introductory video, I want to answer 3 questions I think you might have. Is this the right class for me? Who is the person teaching this class, and who am I? And what is the material covered in this class? So let's start with who this class is for. People often ask, is this class meant for beginners, intermediate developers, or experts? Now, due to the nature of the content, I find that question is a little bit misleading. There are 4 different skills that we need to discuss in terms of difficulty. So first, there is your general knowledge of programming. And second, there is your knowledge of Python. And third, there is your knowledge of web standards, web protocols, the web. Fourth and finally is your knowledge of Django. So none of the classes that I give are for programming or Python beginners. I assume that you've programmed before and that you've already used a little bit of Python. If you are new to programming, or if you are very, very new to Python, I recommend starting with a different class. The goal of my class series is to teach Python developers how to program on the web using Django. The first class teaches web development fundamentals. We touch upon front-end development, but focus on Flask and Django to demonstrate back-end web development. If you aren't sure about the difference between back-end and front-end web development, or if you're unfamiliar with HTTP request response, or even HTML, or how any of these work together, I would recommend starting with the material in the first class. The second class reviews the fundamentals, but is centrally focused on Django. We focus on how Django projects are organized, how Django is equipped to handle HTTP, and how Django models, views, URL patterns, and templates all work together to make your life easier. We combine Django and the Django REST framework to build an API and show you how to use Django to write terse, declarative code to minimize your work. If you're familiar with web development fundamentals or are coming from another web framework, then I would recommend looking at the material in the second class. The third class is an advanced Django course. I assume that you understand not only how to program, how Python works, and how the web works, but I also assume that you feel pretty comfortable with Django fundamentals. The class is a bit more of a topics class and less of a linear progression like the second class. We focus on testing, authentication, and optimization. We also see what to do in situations where Django isn't quite enough. In one of these cases, we look at supplementing Django, and in the other case, we look to the future of Django and web development in Python. Now, let's answer the second question. Who is the person teaching this course? So, my name is Andrew Pinkham. I am currently the VP of Engineering at a startup named TrueTickets based in Boston. And I am also the founder of Jambon Software, a consulting company also based in Boston. And yes, for those who speak French, that is Ham Software, based on my high school nickname in France, Jambon Rouge, or literally Pink Ham, which is how you spell my surname. I have been working in Python since 2011 and have focused heavily on Django since 2012. I've been a repeat speaker at DjangoCon US since 2013, as well as the author of Django Unleashed, published by Pearson under the SAMS imprint in 2015. I have a computer science degree from Dartmouth, where I also performed security-focused graduate work. And prior to working at Jambon Software, I worked in the startup space in Austin, Texas, where I had the chance to play with PHP, Ruby, Objective-C, and finally, my favorite, Python. And these days, I spend most of my time writing Python, TypeScript, and a little bit of Go. I have written all sorts of software and all sorts of apps in Django. In Django specifically, I've built APIs for iOS and Android apps. I've helped optimize accounting software. I've helped upgrade really old versions of Django and Python to modern versions of the technologies. I've even worked with a team to run Django and Python on a set of embedded devices. I've spent a lot of time in Django, and I continue to be excited by it. I am excited to share this amazing tool with you. So thank you for coming along for the journey. Let's talk about the material in the class. My approach with Django is to teach it bottom up. This is honestly the biggest difference between my approach and most other people's approach to this material. I show you the hard way of doing things so that I can reveal the moving pieces and make it easier to understand some of the fundamentals. Then, we use whatever shortcuts are provided by Django or the Django REST framework to simplify that code. Generally, if you were programming in the wild, you would start with a shortcut. But by doing the bottoms-up approach, you get a peek under the hood and see how stuff works, and make it all seem a little bit less magic. We start this course with testing. Testing can be a bit dry, but it is crucial to software. We start by looking at the why, what, and how of testing, and then we dive into test all of the different components of Django. You also get a taste of Django's check framework. Now, that won't really be the end of testing in this class, as testing is going to be fundamental to many of our other lessons. For instance, our second lesson is going to be about authentication. As we log in and log out a user, we're also going to see how to test the views that enable these new features. One of the overarching goals of the entire course is to help make testing easier and more accessible. And to that end, I would recommend that you start with Lesson 1, and after that, you're welcome to skip around however you please. Coming back to Lesson 2, we will start by looking at authentication, or log in and log out, but our focus won't be limited to just that. As always, we'll start the lesson by discussing the fundamental, and then we'll dive into how to work with Django with those fundamentals. We'll build login, logout, views to allow users to change their password, views to allow people to reset their forgotten passwords, and even get new users signed up onto the site. In Lesson 3, we will see how to use authentication and authorization to protect our API endpoints. While the fundamentals are similar to Lesson 2, the actual work is actually fairly different. We start by implementing token authentication and then switch to more robust OAuth 2 authorization. We switch our testing gears in this lesson using Postman to interact with our API instead of using the unit test material that we see starting in Lesson 1. In Lesson 4, we look at optimization. We talk about how you should optimize a backend web app and what common optimization problems are for most web applications. We'll see how to optimize database interactions using models and talk about how to improve the site using caching techniques. In Lesson 5, we add a little bit of polish to our website. We use some of Django's contributed library and some of Django's generic views to make navigation easier. This includes adding a few pages to organize things alphabetically and by date, as well as how to generate RSS and Atom feeds, as well as a sitemap to make search engines a little happier when they find your site. Finally, we also add some basic CSS to our site to make things a little bit prettier. In Lesson 6, we see one of the places where Django needs a little bit of help. The problem, in short, is that web browsers expect you to get a response back to them very quickly. However, sometimes you need to perform a computation for longer than the round-trip time. For our app to handle situations like these, we'll need to offload work from Django to some other process. We see how to use Celery and queues in tandem with Django to handle this sort of scenario. Finally, in Lesson 7, we look at changes happening in Python and Django. We discuss Python's new async features, see an example of using async in a different framework, and even program an app that uses WebSockets as well as HTTP. To end the lesson, we look at how these changes will be affecting Django in the near future. We are going to cover a lot of ground. Keep in mind that you can always pause the video, rewind, and rewatch. The great part of courses like this is that you can go at your own pace. To top it all off, all of the code I will be using and showing is available on GitHub. I am very excited to show you all this material. With that, let's get started with Lesson 1 and how to test Django.